Welcome to High Growth Matters, an open comp podcast for influential players in the pre-IPO ecosystem. This show shares insider knowledge about building a badass business, and the expert conversation you're about to hear will cover everything you need to know about hiring and retention, fundraising, leadership, diversity, and more. Let's get to it. Hi, everyone. This is Caitlin Allen, your co-host and VP of Marketing at Open Comp.
And your other co-host, Nancy Connery. Hello, everybody. I am co-founder of Open Comp and principal at Connery Consulting. Thank you for joining us today.
Yes, thank you for joining us. So HR invests a lot of both passion and resources in supporting people managers across a variety of different areas, hiring, retention, compensation, many more things. And that is especially true for sales teams, which are the revenue backbone of the modern business. And so in this podcast, we are going to talk to seasoned executive Jesse Osborne about what he has learned about managing successful sales teams in multiple hyper-growth environments. He's also going to share tips for our listeners, HR professionals who want to support thriving sales organizations. So we'll dive in. Jesse, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Caitlin and Nancy.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Jesse. So Jesse, you had quite a very amazing and interesting career. Started your career in Fortune 500 companies that have led sales teams for more than a decade and 4 early stage startups. We know how that goes. Some that have done amazingly well, some that, it hasn't gone quite as well. With that said, what are, 1 or 2 things most of your coworkers don't actually know about you?
That's a great question, Nancy. I don't think anyone except for my dad knows that I consider myself to be the youngest attorney ever in California. At the age of 7, my dad got a speeding ticket and brought me to court. And when they said, Mr. Osborne, you're next up, my dad looked at him and said, Your Honor, I'd like to present my attorney, Jesse Osborne. And the judge laughed so hard, the first thing he said was, case dismissed, exits to the left, and my dad got out of the ticket. So I have 100% win rate, didn't even pass the bar or anything, but I'm a really good attorney if you ever need one.
You have another career.
Maybe, who knows? This is just part 1.
That's a good one, Jesse. I will give you that for sure.
That is absolutely hilarious. I don't know why you ever went into sales, or maybe actually I do understand.
Yeah, I think it makes sense.
Well, I did. I got ice cream after. I got to go to the fair, and then my dad bought me ice cream, and I couldn't understand why he was being so nice to me, and I realized now I should have charged him.
It's like the first version of an incentive comp plan. Ice cream.
Exactly, yeah. Ice cream.
So you currently lead a team of 94, at least last week talked to Jesse, and 3 directors, 14 frontline managers. How have you built that team out, and what did HR do to support you in that process, including everything from comp ranges to target profiles to maybe even running an effective interview process?
So that's a lot. I'd say it's evolved over time. In the beginning, when I joined here, I think we had about 12 SDRs when I joined at Tipalti. And I'm not kidding you, on my very first morning on the job, I lost 4 people. 4 people came up to me and said, hey, nice to meet you. Today's my last day. I started thinking, what did I get myself? I'd missed all this in my interview process, apparently. But it was actually a blessing in disguise because it gave me the opportunity to sit down with the remaining 8 and those 4 that resigned as well to find out, hey, why are you leaving? What's broken here? And it really was insightful to see some of the areas and some of the disconnects, I think, that had been in place ahead of time, which gave me a true launch pad to start jumping in and fixing things, and which included the hiring profile. And I think partnering with HR on this and really taking a dive into what do we need at this stage? And, thinking about when I had a team of 8 SDRs here, and we were still very early stage. I think we were just over 100 employees at the time that I joined. We're now at a little over 1,000 here at Tipalti. And at that stage, we didn't need executioners. We needed builders. We needed folks that wanted to be creative and really wanted to test out new things. We weren't looking for robots. And that's evolved over time. And I think that's something that companies have to be aware of, is that as your team scales and grows, your needs are going to evolve. And partnering with HR, who are the experts at this, who really understand core competencies, and creating interview guides that can help you lead down that path to identify some of those behaviors, because a resume it only tells a part of the story. And in fact, there were candidates that I would say that we hired here that didn't look good on paper, that might have had a few jobs they had hopped around. But you know what we found is that these were some of the most creative, ambitious people that we could have hired. And they weren't afraid to take a risk. And as opposed to someone that we hired that might have worked at one company for 6 or 7 years, they weren't that risk adverse, right? So I think really understanding that. Now today, I may not want that builder scrapper as much, because we've got a defined playbook and we have robust processes. So we do need folks that are willing to jump in and learn and train and execute. So that evolves over time. And I think that's something that you can work with your HR team on really, really closely to constantly do those checks and say, hey, are we, that hiring profile, it's got to evolve. The job description is not something that's gonna be stale.
Out of curiosity, what were the traits or characteristics that made those folks stand out to you?
Extremely inquisitive. And I think with some of those creative types, they're going to challenge the status quo and try to understand the why more so than others. And I think that's something, when you talk about curiosity, that's something you can identify in an interview process. The part at the end of the interview, when you say, what questions do you have for me? When you hear questions like, what's the pay? What are the hours? You're not talking to someone who's thinking critically about the opportunity in front of them. And so that's something that I put a lot of weight on in the interview process, is at the end of that interview, what questions do you have for me? And when I hear things like, oh, the other person answered all my questions, or I don't have any, or they ask questions that are like checkbox questions, as opposed to really thinking about what am I getting into here, and then how can I see myself being successful here? You can see the wheels turning in someone's head, and I think that is so important in the earlier stages. It's still important today, don't get me wrong, but it's a deal breaker in the beginning, as far as I'm concerned. When you're building that team from scratch or from the ground up, you really need folks that you can say, hey, what are your thoughts on this? As opposed to them coming to you and saying, hey, Caitlin, how should I address this? Or Nancy, what should I do? It's more problem solving skills. It's actually how I identified my first SDR promotion too. I told you that I had a bunch of folks that had left in my first morning on the job, and I sat down with the remaining team and I said, explain to me some of the challenges that you see, and I heard kind of the standard, the comp plan this and quotas this and process that, but there was one SDR that said she listed all the same issues, but then she said, and here's how I'd address those and solve those. And I thought, boom, I found the first SDR manager here. And her name's Danielle, and she's now not only became an SDR manager, she's now a senior SDR manager, overseeing other SDR managers and overseeing our entire Europe and North America inbound teams. Good. So this is someone who was just an SDR a couple of years ago and has just continuously been solving problems over and over again. Now I had another SDR manager on the team when I joined, and he's phenomenal. His name's Corey, and he was the sanity check guy, where, as I mentioned, these folks were coming and leaving and they were complaining, but he was like the dad in the office where everyone felt comfortable going to him. And I think having this combination of frontline leaders, that one is very tactical and problem solving oriented, and one is like the guy you can go cry on his shoulder, having that element, I think in the early stages, and thinking about your leadership team and what roles they fill and what roles and what holes they can plug is extremely helpful. One of the things we didn't have, though, is we didn't have that, what I call like the playbook dashboard sales operations person on the team at the time. And so partnered with HR and talked about some of the holes that I think we had on the SDR leadership side. And they went out and found the perfect guy, a guy named Spencer. And they're still my team today. 3 years later, 3.5, almost 4 years later now, Danielle, Corey, and Spencer are still right beside me. And those are my lieutenants, and I couldn't do a thing without them. So this is not about one person trying to solve every problem themselves. It's about surrounding yourself with smart people and understanding what they're going to be drawn into. It's one of the questions I love to ask, and this is a good nugget for any leader out there to think about when interviewing. If you're looking for holes to plug on your team, I came up with this question by myself. So since this is being recorded, this can go out to the world. Ask the question, if you had an hour free on your calendar, which a lot of us don't, a lot of us were packed back to back to back, but let's say you had one free hour, what would you do? And it's not a behavioral based question in terms of how have you handled this or what would you, what have you done in the past on this, but it demonstrates what they're interested in. So for me, it might be, I'm going to go build out a spreadsheet and analyze some data. Another person might say, I'm going to get the team together and do a training. And you start to see what people are drawn into. And that's where I think as you're rounding out your team to start thinking about what are some of the holes that we need to plug. We're not looking for clones here. So that was a long-winded answer to your question.
Jesse, you just gave lots of good nuggets in that answer. And it's very clear that you are a very successful, seasoned hiring manager and that we would work very well together. Makes me think back to our early days at Salesforce when we first started hiring salespeople. And we thought, let's go after all the big guns at Oracle, and
Right.
Then they came to Salesforce and we were scrappy and small and you had to roll up your sleeves. And it was really clear that just having, and I don't mean just, they had incredible experience, but having that big company experience did not translate into success at a startup, and that you really need, both ends of the equation, and that you need to show that ability to be scrappy, that grit, you will do whatever it takes, and wear whatever hat necessary. So we very much speak the same language. And having said that, how has that early profile and process changed as Tipalti has grown?
Well, I think so. I think a good way to think of it is building out a playbook. So in the beginning, myself and my two at the time, Corey and Danielle, said, let's build a playbook together. And we created Google Doc and built a table of contents and said, all right, we got our table of contents. And then we got busy with other things. And long story short, it took us 2.5 years to actually finalize a playbook. And I actually, in retrospect, think that was the absolute right approach. Because if you try to overstructure it in the very beginning, then you're gonna reduce the amount of creative element that comes into your organization. So, not saying process isn't important. That's not what I'm saying. But it's if you have some gray area, then you start to hire the folks that come in and start to fill in some of that gray area, and then that turns into your playbook. So I think to answer your question more directly, it's evolved as our playbook has evolved. In the beginning, we didn't have a playbook. Then it became a Google Doc with a table of contents. Then it was like a PowerPoint deck that just had a lot of unmatching topics and themes, a little messy, but it was coming together. And now it's like this awesome, it's not even a book. It's a what's called a Rise guide. So it's a link, it's interactive, and it's very scalable because we can make edits to it as we make little tweaks. But I think that correlates with the team building too, that in the beginning you want to be building towards that structure so that you can start chasing the right things and focusing your team in the right areas and create repeatable processes. But if you come in on day one and think, all right, we're going to take that playbook from IBM or from Oracle and implement it over to Salesforce back in 1999, that wouldn't have made sense, right?
Completely.
It evolves over time.
Been there with you.
I love it. Jesse, in our prep call, I believe you said you wrote a comp plan on day 8 of being at Tipalti that has not changed. So I'm curious to know, what is that comp plan, and what are you using to measure its success?
It was day 8, and the funny part is that I was sitting at the lunch tables and I saw our CFO walking through the kitchen, and I said, "Hey, Sarah, do you have a minute?" And she said, "Sure." And we sat down and wrote the comp plan in about 15 minutes. Now I had 7 days before that to really think about this, so it wasn't just coming up out of nowhere. But to me, it's about simplification. And what I found when I joined here was out of the 8 SDRs that were here from day 2 to day 7, no one could explain it to me in an articulate way, and that made me really concerned about creating a structure that was so complicated. Now, to build comp plans, it is complicated. There do need to be complexities built into it, but the output of it should be very simple. So what had been put in, it was kind of like a half formula. Like I could say, Caitlin, your quota this month is going to be 10 plus 20 minus 12 plus 18 divided by 3 times 4 times 0.26. Or I could just say, hey, your quota is 12, right? So just get the output to it. So backing into the number and then figuring out the unit economics that are going to support that, does it make sense? Is something that I was very passionate about, and ensuring that they had a very simple comp plan that could be described in 2 to 3 sentences, so that they weren't thinking about this the whole time. They didn't have to. It wasn't a complicated formula to figure out what's my paycheck going to be. I want it to be really, really simple. So that was the philosophy behind it.
So safe to say then that the stay away from that our listeners should keep top of mind is complexity, in terms of things that ideally a team should be able to say a comp plan and what it means in 2 or 3 sentences.
Exactly. Keep it simple.
Cool. And in terms of measuring that comp plan success, are you looking at things like quota attainment? Is there something else?
Yeah, quota. We look at quota attainment, but we also change them every year. It's when I say change them, not the formula, but the inputs that go into it. Mm-hmm. So we created the formula for it, and now it's just a matter of changing those actual numbers in it to spit out a quota. So if we found that we were shy for some reason, then we'll up it. If we found that we over delivered, then we'll adjust it back down. So, but it takes a lot of the subjectivity out of it. And I can tell you this: working in larger companies, there was no input into the quota. It was Nancy, here's your quota. Your quota is X. And there was no explanation as to why. It was just, here it is. And so something that I really want to understand is, walk me through the math of how you got to this number. And the first time I ever wrote a comp plan, I just came up with a random number. And so when you talk about learning from mistakes, this is going back 10, 12 years when I wrote my very first sales comp plan. I just took a number that I had heard at my last company and it seemed reasonable, and just took that same number. But there wasn't thought about what are the differences in these two companies. One is a late stage, has been around for 75 years. They've got a lot of marketing resources. And another one's a scrappy early stage startup with 25 people, right? So just coming up with a number out of thin air is meaningless. You really have to look at, I talk about the unit economics a lot. AEs and SDRs have to pay for each other, have to pay for engineering, have to pay for rent, have to pay for all this stuff. So what are the unit economics behind the quotas? And then are they reasonable and realistic? And then what are the tools and resources that you need to get to those? And that's how it all comes together. So you can't just pick a number randomly. You have to consider all the different variables and factors that go into it. And then that spits out a number that you don't have to question, because you know it's the right number. It's not my quota is too high. It's this is my quota because this is what we have to do. And it's got bought. And I think when you explain it to the folks on the team, they understand it. Mm-hmm. So it's not just, hey, Caitlin, you had a great quarter last quarter. Guess what? We're going to raise your quota because of that, right? That is lazy quota building to me. To me, it should be a methodical process.
Yeah.
Congratulations. You've done a great job. You're going to be punished now.
Right. Exactly.
And that happens, actually. in some
Oh yeah, it
companies,
does.
how you make your quota goes up. Good luck next time around. And clearly you have a very thoughtful process, but key takeaway also is simplicity, and also being able to explain it, and then your reps and your hires to really understand it. I've seen a lot of companies where they overcomplicate it, and as a result, it's actually a barrier to entry in the recruitment process.
Right.
If your sales managers who are hiring can't explain it, then certainly the recruitment team that's not even in sales per se can't explain it. And, I think as long as you, like you said, simplicity, transparency, and that goes a very long way. So
I agree 100%.
And you also previously shared, you must have this, magic wand. You also previously shared with us, your belief that a big recession is coming and a reset. What are you, doing to prepare your team, for this, and what support are you getting from the HR team?
You want to hear the eternal optimist in me?
Yes.
I'm excited for this, and I'll tell you, and I'll explain why I'm excited for it. For those who've been around a while, this is not the first economic downturn that I'm experiencing, and I can say with confidence that through the two that I went through the .com explosion and then the 08, 09 real estate mortgage stuff, and boy, it made you a lot better when you get out of it. It's not going to kill you, right? It's just going to make you work differently, work smarter, and work harder. And I think it makes you better. And so I think we're all going to get tested in a very good way. I think it's going to help us to think about things like efficiency. If you look at a lot of startups today, it's just growth. That's the only metric that folks care about. Now efficiency is more important, and it's going to make you think more critically, and it's going to make you evaluate some of your processes. And I don't think that's only going to make us better. Now, I'm not optimistic. I realize folks have lost their jobs and are probably going to lose jobs. So I'm not excited about that part. But I think the fast forward 5, 6, 7 years from now, this will become an arrow in everyone's quiver that they'll be able to rely on when they go through another one. And I've got a lot of folks on my team that this will probably be the first one they're going through. And I think the message to them is, hey, this isn't the first one and it won't be the last one you go through, but take advantage of the learnings that you're going to get from this, because guess what? When you get to round 2, which might be in, I don't know, I'm not an economist, but might be in 10 to 12 years from now, you might go through another one. Guess what? You'll be more prepared. I'm going in, if we are going into one, which who knows, right? That's not my expertise, but if we are going to go into one, I think that it's more about the mental preparation than anything.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I've been through the same downturns that you have as well, and turn them into opportunities to really learn. And, when it comes around again, which it seems to be knocking on our doors, how are you prepared, and how do you come out stronger on the other end? And also having a team where many or maybe all of them have never seen a downturn. How do you turn that into a positive learning, aside from, of course, like you mentioned, the folks who have lost their jobs, but also. And
I think acknowledging it, that it's in the moment, it's terrifying. I mean, I remember in the 08, 09 downturn, the company I was working with at the time, they had a conference call every Friday. And this was terrifying. And every Friday they would announce the names of the people that had been let go.
Oh my.
Yeah.
And if you got invited to that, you were so happy. Like, oh, yeah, great, I got the calendar invite. I'm not one of the people getting cut, but oh my gosh, my friends might be, or my peers might be. And so it was, in the moment, it was horrible.
Right.
But like my, like some good advice I've had is maybe things are usually worse in your head than they are in reality. So things can be a blessing in disguise. You never know.
Yeah. No, I hear you on all of that, and I wholeheartedly agree. During previous downturns, where have you seen HR miss in supporting you and your teams?
So I worked in HR back in the 08, 09 one. I was in talent acquisition. My manager was the director of HR, so I was very involved in some of those conversations, and so I felt very supported. But I think that's the opportunity for HR is to is to convey some of that, the sense of calm that they can bring out there without sugarcoating things, right? Because it's a very tricky time right now. I mean, I'm glad I'm not in HR. Trying to figure out COVID protocols, I mean, that has got to be just a nightmare trying to figure all that stuff out, and because you're never going to make 100% of the people happy. Whether you're doing a hybrid environment or remote environment, you require masks, vaccinations, all that stuff. You're not going to get to 100% of at least I don't think so, of your population all being happy and saying, great, we're all making the right decisions. You're always going to have people second guessing you, and that's where I think HR can really step in to provide that sound calmness to say, hey, we don't have it all figured out. We're just people. We're trying to figure this stuff out too. And I think if we can humanize it a little bit, I guess that's why it's called human resources. I think that's the win for them.
Yeah, very well said.
It is. Jesse, thank you for this conversation. It's been wonderful. The examples in particular have been very evocative. As you know, we're talking to HR leaders. If there's one thing that you could ask them to remember from something you said or that you want to still say, what would it be?
Encourage your teams to keep it simple. You know, I think even when it comes to hiring, I think sometimes we try to overcomplicate the interview process or the interview guides or the competencies, and sometimes it doesn't resonate as well with the field. So I think trying to stay in touch with your frontline leaders to build that bridge. While they want to keep it simple, you might want to make it more complicated. So trying to find that middle ground, I think is key to good partnership there.
Keep it simple.
There you go.
Just like the comp plan.
Exactly.
Exactly. That's what it's all about.
Exactly. Well, thank you, Jesse. We have really.
Thank you.
Win top talent while strengthening runway with OpenComp. Thousands of the world's fastest growing companies use our compensation intelligence platform because it offers the most competitive benchmarks and insights available. To learn more, visit app.opencomp.com/signup.